Uncle Harold's hands trembled as he set down the yellowed deed, his face drained of all color. The mahogany conference table seemed to stretch endlessly between us, but I could hear his shallow breathing from across the room. 37 years, he whispered, staring at the signature that had been hiding in plain sight all along. 37 years I've been calling him the rightful owner. His eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear there. Real fear. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, the same chair where he'd sat just hours earlier, gloating about his inheritance. But now the lawyer's words hung in the air like smoke. The cabin belongs to Ms. Megan Chen, as it has since 1987. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds of his reckoning, and I realized that sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. My name is Megan, and I've spent most of my 34 years believing I was the family afterthought. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jerking me from the kind of deep sleep that only comes after 3 consecutive nights of a teething baby. Maya's wails had finally stopped around 4, and I'd collapsed into bed still wearing yesterday's clothes, my hair in a knot so tight it left dents in my scalp. Vicky? Thank God you answered. Uncle Harold's voice crackled through the phone, unusually breathless. I have news. Big news. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and stumbled toward the kitchen, stepping over wooden blocks and a deflated balloon from Maya's first birthday party last month. The coffee maker gurgled to life with the desperation of a woman who'd had maybe 6 hours of sleep in the past week. What's wrong? I asked, already calculating how much money I didn't have if this was another family emergency. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's finally right. His voice carried a strange excitement I'd never heard before. Your grandfather's cabin up in Pine Ridge, you know, the one where we used to take you kids fishing? Of course I knew it. Summers there had been the only time I'd felt like I truly belonged somewhere, sitting on that wraparound porch at sunset, listening to Grandpa Joe tell stories about building the place with his own hands in 1974. The smell of cedar and lake water. The way the morning mist rolled off the water like smoke. What about it? Brandon's getting it. Harold's words tumbled out in a rush. The whole property. 3 acres, the cabin, the dock, everything. Can you believe it? That boy's finally going to have something substantial, something real to build his future on. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen tile. Dark liquid splashed across the white cabinets, and I stood there staring at the mess, my bare feet suddenly cold against the floor. Brandon? My voice came out smaller than I intended. I know, it's been tied up in probate for 2 years since Joe passed, but the lawyers finally sorted everything out. Brandon's going up there this weekend to assess the property, maybe start making some improvements. You know how good he is with his hands. Through the kitchen window, I watched my neighbor Mrs. Peterson walking her ancient golden retriever, the same routine every morning at exactly 6:50. Normal people living normal lives while my world tilted sideways. How much is it worth? The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Harold chuckled. Well, lakefront property up there goes for about $400,000 now, and the cabin's been maintained beautifully. Could be worth $500,000, easy. Maybe more with the right improvements. $500,000. I thought about the stack of medical bills on my counter from Maya's emergency room visit last month. The collection notices I'd hidden from David. The way I'd been putting groceries on credit cards and lying awake at night doing math that never worked out right. That's wonderful for him, I managed. Isn't it? Brandon's worked so hard these past few years, getting that engineering degree, landing that job with the county. He deserves this, you know? A real foundation to start from. Brandon, who'd lived rent-free in Harold's basement until he was 28. Brandon, who'd totaled 3 cars by the time he turned 21 and never paid for the insurance. Brandon, who'd borrowed $2,000 from me 4 years ago to get back on his feet and still owed me every penny. Does he know yet? I asked, bending to pick up the larger pieces of ceramic, feeling the sharp edge of one slice into my thumb. I'm calling him next. Wanted to share the good news with you first, honey. I know how close you were to your grandfather. Blood dropped from my thumb onto the kitchen floor, mixing with the spilled coffee. I wrapped the cut in a dish towel and tried to remember how to breathe. Megan? You still there? Yeah, I'm here. I leaned against the counter, watching my own blood soak through the white cotton. Harold, can I ask you something? Of course. Did Grandpa Joe ever mention me in his will? I mean, I know I'm not expecting anything, but... Oh, sweetheart. His voice softened with something that might have been pity. You know your grandfather loved you, But men of his generation, they think differently about these things. Providing for the family name, making sure the men can take care of their families. It's not personal. Not personal. I thought about the summers when Brandon would disappear for days, off with his friends while I helped Grandpa repair the dock, learned to identify bird calls, sat beside him on quiet evenings while he taught me to tie fishing knots with patience I never saw him show anyone else. Besides, Harold continued, you're married to David now. You're taken care of. Brandon needs this more than you do. Taken care of. I looked around my tiny kitchen with its peeling linoleum and broken cabinet handle I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. Through the thin walls, I could hear Maya starting to fuss in her crib and David's alarm clock buzzing for the 3rd time. I should let you go, I said. Maya's waking up. Of course, honey. Kiss that beautiful baby for me. And tell David congratulations on the promotion. I hung up before I could tell him there was no promotion. David had been passed over again, just like last time and the time before that. But Harold didn't need to know that successful, capable Brandon had a sister who was barely keeping her head above water. Maya's cries grew louder, and I heard David's feet hit the floor in our bedroom. In 30 minutes, he'd leave for his job at the insurance office, where he'd spend 8 hours explaining to people why their claims were denied. I'd spend the day changing diapers, heating bottles, and trying to make $12 stretch far enough for dinner ingredients. And Brandon would drive up to Pine Ridge in his new truck, survey his inheritance, and probably take photos to post on social media with some caption about being blessed. I pressed the dish towel harder against my bleeding thumb and realized I was crying. But something else was growing beneath the tears, a strange, quiet determination I'd never felt before. Because as I stood there in my broken kitchen, listening to Harold's words echo in my mind, I remembered something he didn't know I knew. Something about a conversation I'd overheard when I was 12 years old, the summer before Grandpa Joe got sick. Something about papers he'd had his lawyer draw up, about making sure the right person gets what matters most. Something that might change everything. The memory came back to me in fragments throughout that morning, like puzzle pieces floating to the surface of murky water. I was feeding Maya her breakfast when I remembered the smell first, cedar shavings and the musty scent of old legal documents. Then the sound of Grandpa Joe's voice, lower than usual, coming from his study while I'd been looking for a book in the hallway outside. Maya threw her spoonful of mashed banana at the wall, and I mechanically wiped it off while my mind traveled back 22 years. Harold doesn't need to know about this yet, Bill. Maybe not ever. But Joe, if something happens to you, something's going to happen to me eventually. That's why we're doing this now, while my mind's still sharp. The cabin goes to Megan. Has to be Megan. The lawyer's voice had been harder to make out through the heavy oak door. And your nephew? Harold's been managing the property taxes for years. Harold's expecting what Harold's always expected, that his boy gets everything because he's the boy. But Megan's the one who understands that place. She's the one who listens when I tell the stories. She's got her grandmother's heart. I'd pressed my 12-year-old ear closer to the door, my pulse hammering with the thrill of hearing something I shouldn't. The papers need to be filed properly, Bill. Notarized, witnessed, the whole 9 yards. And I want a copy locked in your safe. Harold's a good man, but he sees what he wants to see. Maya's demanding babble pulled me back to the present. She was pointing at her empty juice cup with the imperious authority only a 1-year-old could muster. I refilled it automatically, my hands moving without conscious thought. Had I imagined that conversation? For 22 years, I'd assumed it was either a dream or the wishful thinking of a 12-year-old girl who desperately wanted to matter. But now, my phone buzzed against the counter. A text from my sister-in-law Jennifer, heard about Brandon's cabin. So exciting. We should plan a family vacation up there this summer. Camping sparkles 3 exclamation points. Jennifer always used 3 exclamation points when she was either genuinely happy or performing happiness for an audience. Given that she'd barely spoken to me since Christmas when David and I couldn't afford to bring gifts for her kids, I suspected this was performance. I set the phone down without responding and finished cleaning Maya's face, my mind racing. If that conversation had been real, then somewhere in Pine Ridge, or in some lawyer's office, there might be documents that could change everything. But how could I find out without looking like I was challenging Brandon's inheritance out of jealousy? Harold already saw me as the family charity case. David's sister constantly reminded everyone that we lived in a rental house while she and her husband owned a 4-bedroom colonial. The last thing I needed was to be labeled as the bitter relative trying to steal her brother's good fortune. Maya started rubbing her eyes, the first sign of an impending meltdown. I scooped her up and carried her to the living room, settling into the rocking chair David's mother had given us when Maya was born. It was the only piece of furniture in our house that hadn't come from a thrift store or Facebook marketplace. As Maya's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, I found myself staring at the framed photo on the side table, me, Brandon, and Harold at the cabin 5 summers ago, the last time we'd all been there together. Brandon had his arm around Harold's shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. I was standing slightly apart, holding Maya as a newborn, looking tired and overwhelmed. Even then, I could see it in their posture, the easy assumption that Brandon belonged in that space, that the cabin was somehow already his in spirit if not on paper. I was just the grateful recipient of their generosity in including me. But in that photo, if you looked closely, you could see something else. Behind us, carved into one of the porch posts, were the initials VC plus Grandpa Joe 1998. He'd helped me carve them the summer I turned 10, after I'd confided that I felt invisible at family gatherings. "You're not invisible to me, little fish," he'd said, using the nickname he'd given me after I'd caught my first trout. "Someday, when you're grown up with troubles of your own, you'll remember this place and know you've always had somewhere to belong." My phone rang, startling Maya awake. David's name on the screen. "Hey," I answered, trying to keep my voice low while Maya resettled. "You sound weird. Everything okay?" David's voice carried the particular strain it got when he was calling from his desk at work, trying to sound casual while his supervisor probably lurked nearby. We'd been married for 6 years, together for 8, and I'd learned to read the subtle codes of his communication. "Harold called this morning. Brandon's inheriting Grandpa Joe's cabin." Silence. Then, "Shit. I'm sorry, Vic. I know how much that place meant to you." This was why I'd married David. Not because he was ambitious or wealthy or even particularly handsome, but because he was the first person who'd ever noticed when I was hurting and cared enough to acknowledge it. "It's fine," I lied. I think there might be something off about the whole thing." "Off how?" I told him about the conversation I'd overheard, watching Maya's small chest rise and fall while I spoke. When I finished, David was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Vic, that was over 20 years ago. And you were just a kid. I know how it sounds. I'm not saying you're wrong. But even if your grandfather did want you to have the cabin, wills get contested all the time. Legal battles are expensive. Really expensive. We can barely afford Maya's daycare." He was right, and we both knew it. The rational thing to do was accept Harold's version of events, congratulate Brandon, and move on with our lives. But something in my chest, a stubborn, angry knot I'd carried for years, refused to let go. What if I could find out for sure? Without spending money we don't have? How? I thought about it, rocking Maya while she dozed. The lawyer. The one I heard talking to Grandpa Joe. His name was Bill something. If he's still practicing up there. Vic. I could drive up there Saturday. While Brandon's doing his property assessment. Just ask a few questions. And what if you're right? What if there are documents that say the cabin should be yours? Then what? You going to tell Harold his golden boy doesn't deserve his inheritance? You think that ends well for us? Through the window, I watched Mrs. Peterson walk by again with her dog, the same route as this morning. Some people got to live the same safe day over and over. Some people had that luxury. I don't know, I admitted. But I have to know the truth. Don't you understand? My whole life, I've been the one who gets the leftovers. The afterthought. The one everyone feels sorry for but nobody actually helps. Just once, I want to know if I was supposed to matter. Maya stirred in my arms, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake up hungry and demanding in about 10 minutes. I had exactly that long to make David understand why I couldn't let this go. "David, if I'm right, if the cabin really should be mine, that's our daughter's future. That's a college fund. That's Maya never having to worry about whether we can afford the things she needs. And if you're wrong, you look like you're trying to steal from your own family out of desperation." Maybe I am desperate. The words came out sharper than I intended. Maybe I'm tired of being grateful for crumbs while everyone else gets the whole damn meal. David sighed, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was trying to solve a problem that had no good solutions. "Okay," he said finally. "Saturday. But you take my car, yours won't make it up those mountain roads. And Vic, promise me you'll be careful. Not just about the driving. About all of it." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room listening to Maya breathe and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that my life could be different than what everyone expected. But first, I had to find Bill the lawyer. And I had to do it before Brandon signed whatever papers would make his inheritance official. The question was whether I had the courage to risk everything on the memory of a 12-year-old girl who'd always been told she was imagining things. Saturday morning dawned gray and hostile, the kind of October sky that promised rain before noon. I strapped Maya into her car seat in David's Honda, watching her chew on a teething ring while I second-guessed everything about this trip. The drive to Pine Ridge took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that David's car handled better than I'd expected. Maya fell asleep somewhere around mile marker 47, and I was left alone with my thoughts and the satellite radio playing soft country music that reminded me of Grandpa Joe. Pine Ridge looked smaller than I remembered. Main Street stretched for maybe 6 blocks, anchored by a hardware store that had been there since the 1950s and a coffee shop with hand-painted signs advertising locally roasted beans. Tourism had touched the town lightly, a few bed and breakfasts, an art gallery that sold landscape paintings to weekend visitors, but it still felt like the place where I'd spent those magical childhood summers. I parked in front of Millie's Diner, the same place Grandpa Joe used to take me for chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning. Through the window, I could see the red vinyl booths hadn't changed, and neither had the pie display case that had once seemed tall as a building to my 8-year-old eyes. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in, Maya balanced on my hip. The waitress behind the counter looked up from filling coffee cups, a woman in her 50s with graying blonde hair and tired eyes that brightened when she saw Maya. "Well, aren't you a little doll?" she said, reaching over to tickle Maya's hand. "What brings you folks to Pine Ridge?" "I'm looking for a lawyer," I said. "Someone who practiced here in the late 90s, early 2000s. His name was Bill, but I don't remember his last name." The waitress, her name tag read Dolores, tilted her head thoughtfully. "Bill Hutchins, maybe? He had an office above the bank for about 15 years. Retired maybe 5-6 years ago." My heart jumped. "Is he still in town?" "Lives out on Maple Creek Road now, about 3 miles north of here. Little blue house with the fishing boats in the yard, you can't miss it." She paused, studying my face. "You look familiar, honey. You from around here?" "My grandfather owned a cabin on the lake." "Joe Chen? I used to spend summers here." Dolores's face lit up with recognition. "Little Megan. My goodness, look at you all grown up with a baby of your own. I remember you used to come in here with Joe every Sunday, order the same pancakes every single time." The warmth in her voice almost undid me. Someone remembered. Someone remembered that I'd belonged here once. "How is your grandfather doing?" she asked. "Haven't seen him in a few years. He passed away 2 years ago." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. He was a good man, your grandfather. Always had time to chat, always tipped well even when money was tight." She refilled my coffee cup without asking. "You know, he used to talk about you all the time. Said you had more sense at 12 than most adults had at 40. I had to look away, blinking hard. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough. This is a small town, everybody knows everybody's business eventually. Joe was private, though. Kept to himself mostly, especially after your grandmother passed. But he sure lit up when he talked about you." Maya started fussing, reaching for the sugar packets on the counter. I handed her a spoon to play with instead, my mind racing with new questions. "Dolores, can I ask you something? Did my grandfather ever mention anything about his will? About who would inherit the cabin?" Her expression grew cautious. "That's not really my business to know, honey. I understand. It's just, there might be some confusion about what he wanted." Dolores glanced around the diner, making sure no other customers were listening, then leaned closer. "I'll tell you this much, about 6 months before he died, Joe came in here looking troubled. Real troubled. Said something about family not always understanding what's right, and how sometimes you had to make hard choices to protect what mattered." She straightened up as another customer entered, but her eyes stayed on mine. "You might want to talk to Bill Hutchins sooner rather than later, honey. He's getting on in years, and his memory isn't what it used to be." 20 minutes later, I was driving north on Maple Creek Road, following Dolores's directions past farmhouses and patches of forest that were just starting to turn autumn colors. Maya had woken up cranky from her nap, and I was singing nonsense songs to keep her calm when I spotted the blue house. Dolores was right, I couldn't miss it. The yard was filled with old fishing boats in various stages of repair, paint cans, and what looked like enough fishing equipment to stock a sporting goods store. A man in his 70s was sitting on the front porch, working on a tackle box. I parked in the gravel driveway and approached carefully, Maya still fussing in my arms. Mr. Hutchins? He looked up, squinting in the afternoon light. That depends on who's asking. My name is Megan Chen. My grandfather was Joe Chen. He owned a cabin on the lake. I think you might have done some legal work for him. Bill Hutchins set down his tackle box and studied me for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that made my pulse quicken. Megan, he said slowly. I remember you. Skinny little thing with braids, always had a book in your hand. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit down, girl. I've been wondering when you'd show up. My hands were shaking as I settled Maya on my lap. You've been expecting me? For 2 years now, ever since Joe passed. Kept wondering why nobody came asking questions. His eyes were shrewd despite his age. Your family tell you about the cabin going to your cousin? My uncle called a few days ago. Said Brandon was inheriting everything. Bill nodded slowly. I figured that's how it would go. Harold never was one to look too close at things he didn't want to see. Mr. Hutchins, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. When I was 12, I overheard a conversation between you and my grandfather about the cabin. About making sure I inherited it instead of Brandon. Was that real, or did I imagine it? Bill was quiet for a long time, watching Maya play with his keychain. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. Your grandfather loved that boy Brandon, don't get me wrong. But he was worried about him too. Thought he was irresponsible, maybe a little too fond of the easy way through life. He looked directly at me. Joe wanted someone who would take care of the place, respect it, understand what it meant. He wanted someone like you. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. So the conversation was real? Real as rain. We drew up a new will in 1998, just after you carved those initials on the porch post. Joe said that's when he knew for sure you understood the place the way your grandmother had. Then why does Harold think Brandon is inheriting? Bill's laugh was bitter. Because your grandfather never told him about the new will. And because I made a mistake I've been regretting for years. He stood up slowly, his joints creaking. Megan, you'd better come inside. We need to talk, and what I have to tell you isn't the kind of thing you discuss on a front porch. As I followed him toward the house, Maya heavy in my arms, I realized that everything I'd believed about my place in the family was about to change forever. But I still had no idea how much. Bill's living room smelled like coffee and old newspapers, with fishing magazines stacked on every available surface. Maya immediately zeroed in on a basket of colorful fishing lures, and I had to intercept her before she could grab a handful of hooks. Let me get you something to occupy her, Bill said, disappearing into a back room. He returned with a wooden box filled with smooth, rounded stones. My late wife collected these from the lake, safe enough for little hands. Maya settled on the braided rug, fascinated by the stones, while Bill lowered himself into a leather recliner that had seen better decades. I perched on the edge of the couch, every muscle in my body tense with anticipation. Megan, what I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry. Probably at me, definitely at your family, maybe at your grandfather too. He reached for a manila folder on the side table. But you deserve to know the truth. Just tell me. Your grandfather filed the new will with my office in September 1998. Legal, proper, notarized, the whole works. Left the cabin and all the property to you, with specific instructions that it was to be held in trust until your 25th birthday. He opened the folder, revealing yellowed documents. He also left detailed letters explaining his reasoning, one for Harold and one for you. My mouth went dry. What happened to it? Nothing happened to it. It's right here. Bill tapped the folder. The problem is what didn't happen. He pulled out a thick document, and even from across the room, I could see my grandfather's distinctive signature at the bottom. My name was typed clearly in the beneficiary section, Megan Elizabeth Chen. I don't understand. If this is legal, if it's valid, then why? Because your grandfather got scared. Bill's voice was heavy with old frustration. About 6 months after we filed the will, Harold came to see Joe. Brought Brandon with him, all excited about some college plans. The boy needed money for school, and Harold was hoping Joe would help with tuition. I remembered that visit. I'd been 13, awkward and invisible as usual, while Brandon charmed everyone with stories about his engineering ambitions. Grandpa Joe had written him a check for $5,000 on the spot. After they left, Joe came to my office in a state. Said he was worried he was being unfair to Brandon, that maybe family harmony was more important than his personal feelings. Bill shook his head. I tried to talk him out of it, But Joe was stubborn when he got an idea in his head. He changed the will back? No, that's the thing. He never formally revoked the 1998 will. Instead, he wrote what he called a safety letter, instructions for me to only reveal the true will if certain conditions were met. My hands were shaking. Maya looked up from her stones, sensing my tension, and I forced my voice to stay calm. What conditions? Joe said if Harold just assumed the property would go to Brandon, if the family seemed unified and happy with that arrangement, then I should let sleeping dogs lie. But if there was ever any indication that you wanted to claim your inheritance, or if you seemed to be struggling financially while Brandon was thriving, then I was supposed to present the real will. The room felt like it was spinning. 24 years. For 24 years, this man had sat on a document that could have changed my entire life. You've known for 2 years that I was supposed to inherit, and you never contacted me? Megan, I tried to find you after Joe's funeral. Harold told me you were doing fine, married to a good man, didn't need any complications. He said you'd specifically asked not to be bothered with estate details because you were dealing with a new baby. I never said that. I know that now. Bill's face was grim. But at the time, I believed him. Harold seemed genuinely convinced that Brandon was the intended heir. He had copies of an older will from 1995 that left everything to the male heirs of the family, and I assumed Joe had simply forgotten to mention the changes to his nephew. I thought about Harold's phone call, his easy assumption that Brandon deserved the inheritance, his dismissive comment about me being taken care of by my marriage. Had he known? Had he deliberately kept Bill from contacting me? There's more, Bill continued. About 3 months ago, Harold came to see me. Said Brandon was ready to take possession of the property, wanted to know if there were any legal complications. I started to mention the 1998 will, and Harold cut me off. Said he was sure Joe had changed his mind about that youthful mistake and that bringing it up would only cause family drama. Youthful mistake? His exact words. Said Joe had been temporarily sentimental about you but had come to his senses. Bill leaned forward. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Your grandfather wasn't sentimental, Megan. He was one of the most practical men I ever met. And he never described you as a mistake, quite the opposite. Maya had crawled over to my feet and was pulling herself up on my legs, demanding attention. I picked her up, breathing in the familiar smell of her baby shampoo while my mind reeled. Harold knows about the real will? I'm not certain, but I suspect he found out somehow. Maybe Joe told him before he died, or maybe he found documents among Joe's papers. Either way, he's been working very hard to make sure it stays buried. The betrayal hit me like ice water. Uncle Harold, who'd always been kind to me, who'd called me sweetheart and remembered my birthday, he'd been actively working to steal my inheritance. What can I do about it? Legally, I mean. Bill studied the documents in his lap. The 1998 will is completely valid. It supersedes any previous wills, and there's no evidence that Joe ever formally revoked it. If you wanted to contest Brandon's claim, you'd have a very strong case. But family lawsuits are ugly, expensive, and they destroy relationships permanently. Even if you win, and you probably would, you'd lose your connection to Harold, Brandon, maybe other family members too. Are you prepared for that? I looked down at Maya, who was contentedly playing with the buttons on my jacket. Was I prepared to blow up what was left of my family for a cabin and some land? Was I prepared to be labeled as greedy, manipulative, the woman who stole her cousin's inheritance? There's something else you should know, Bill said quietly. Your grandfather left specific instructions about what you were supposed to do with the property if you inherited it. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa Joe's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dear Megan, if you're reading this, it means Bill has finally done what I asked him to do, give you what should have been yours from the beginning. I know this might come as a shock, and I know there will be people in the family who disagree with my decision. But I need you to understand why this place belongs to you. Your grandmother and I built this cabin as a sanctuary, a place where our family could always find peace, no matter what storms were raging in the world outside. Over the years, I've watched all the grandchildren enjoy the lake, but only you truly understood what this place was meant to be. Only you sat quietly on the dock and listened to the water. Only you helped me maintain the property without being asked. Only you seemed to feel the same reverence for this land that your grandmother and I felt. Brandon is a good boy, but he sees the cabin as an asset, a stepping stone to something bigger. You see it as home. That's the difference, and that's why it has to be yours. I'm asking you to keep this place in the family, Megan. Not just for ownership, but for preservation. Make it the sanctuary it was always meant to be. And someday, when you have children of your own, teach them to love it the way you do. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for claiming what I've freely given you. You earned this through love, not blood. That makes it more yours than anyone else's. All my love, Grandpa Joe. P.S. Check behind the loose board on the north wall of the cabin. I left something there for you. I was crying before I finished reading, tears dropping onto the aged paper. Maya reached up to pat my face, making concerned baby sounds, and I realized that everything I'd believed about my place in the world had been built on a lie. Megan? Bill's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? I wiped my eyes and looked at him. Brandon's supposed to be at the cabin this weekend, isn't he? Doing his property assessment? That's what Harold said. I stood up, settling Maya more securely in my arms. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely certain about what I needed to do. Mr. Hutchins, I'm going to need copies of all these documents, and I'm going to need you to write down exactly what Harold said to you, with dates if you remember them. Megan, think carefully about this. Once you start down this road, I've been thinking about it for my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. I was already moving toward the door, my mind racing with plans. I had maybe 2 hours before dark, just enough time to drive to the cabin and confront Brandon with the truth. But as I strapped Maya into her car seat, one question kept echoing in my mind. What exactly had Grandpa Joe hidden behind that loose board? And would it be enough to prove, once and for all, that some things were worth fighting for? The cabin looked exactly the same as it had in my childhood memories, but somehow smaller and more fragile. Brandon's shiny black truck sat in the gravel driveway, and I could see lights glowing warm through the windows despite the early afternoon hour. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure Maya could feel it as I parked behind him, her small body fussing softly in her car seat. Through the front windows, I could see Brandon moving around inside with a clipboard, taking notes and photos with the casual efficiency of a man cataloging his new acquisition. The sight of him measuring doorways and testing light switches in my grandfather's sanctuary sent a surge of anger through my chest so sharp it left me breathless. I unbuckled Maya and lifted her out, breathing in the familiar cocktail of pine needles, lake water, and wood smoke that had once meant safety and belonging. Now it smelled like betrayal mixed with possibility. Maya cooed at the sight of the towering evergreens, reaching her small hands toward the branches swaying in the mountain breeze. The porch steps creaked under my feet exactly as they always had. I found myself counting them unconsciously, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the same ritual from childhood when I'd race up them to tell Grandpa Joe about the fish I'd caught or the blue heron I'd spotted. The carved initials were still there on the weathered post, VC plus Grandpa Joe 1998. The same year he'd written the will that should have changed my life. Through the screen door, I could hear Brandon talking on his phone, his voice carrying easy confidence. Yeah, the bones are solid, but the whole interior needs updating. I'm thinking we gut the kitchen completely, go for that modern farmhouse look. Granite countertops, stainless appliances, maybe add a wine fridge. Each word felt like a small knife. He was planning to gut the place, stripping away every trace of character to turn it into some generic vacation rental that would photograph well but have no soul left. I knocked on the wooden frame, harder than necessary. Brandon? It's Megan. The phone conversation stopped abruptly. Vic? He appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely surprised but pleased. What are you doing here? And is this gorgeous little Maya? He looked prosperous, successful and confident in expensive hiking boots and a crisp polo shirt. Even after a day of property assessment, his hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was the same charming one that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. I need to talk to you about the cabin. Come on in. Perfect timing, actually. I was just finishing measurements for the contractor. He held the door open enthusiastically. You wouldn't believe the potential this place has. I'm thinking about adding a second story to maximize square footage. Maybe even put in a hot tub where that old picnic table is. I stepped into the living room, and the familiar smell hit me like a physical blow: cedar paneling, old leather books, and the faint ghost of Grandpa Joe's pipe tobacco that had lingered in the furniture for decades. Maya babbled excitedly, reaching toward the massive stone fireplace as if she recognized something ancestral in this space. The room looked exactly the same. The hand-carved mantel where Grandpa Joe had displayed his fishing lures, the built-in bookshelves packed with field guides, the faded braided rug where I'd spent countless rainy afternoons reading. Brandon had moved some furniture around, but the essence remained untouched. Brandon, sit down. Please. I shifted Maya to my other arm, trying to project authority I didn't feel. Something in my voice made his expression shift, becoming cautious. He set down his clipboard on the coffee table, the same table where Grandpa Joe used to spread out his navigation charts, and settled into the leather chair by the fireplace. Grandpa Joe's chair. The presumption made my jaw clench. I stayed standing, needing every advantage for what I was about to do. Maya was growing heavier, but her warm weight felt like an anchor. I just came from Bill Hutchins's house. Brandon looked puzzled. Who's Bill Hutchins? Grandpa Joe's lawyer. The one who drew up his real will in 1998. I pulled the copies from my purse. The will that leaves this cabin to me. For a long moment, Brandon just stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Then he laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound with no humor. Vic, come on. I know this is hard, seeing me inherit the place you love, but you can't just show up here with fake documents because you're upset. They're not fake. I handed him the papers. Your father knew about this will, Brandon. He's been hiding it from both of us for 2 years. Brandon took the documents reluctantly. I watched his confident expression begin to crack as he scanned the first page. When he reached the signature page and saw Grandpa Joe's distinctive handwriting, his hands started to shake. This can't be right. There has to be some mistake. But doubt was creeping into his voice. Read the date carefully. September 15, 1998. This will is 24 years old. I sat on the old couch, Maya settling into my lap. It's not some last-minute change, it's been legally valid since I was 12. But Dad said Grandpa always intended for me to have this place. He said it was family tradition, property staying with male heirs. He had documentation. Your father lied to you. The words came out harder than intended. Maybe he convinced himself he was protecting you, but he lied to both of us. Brandon set the papers down with trembling hands, his face pale. Vic, you don't understand. I've already committed to renovations. $20,000 down, loans against the expected value. If this is legitimate, I'm financially ruined. For a moment, looking at his genuine distress, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I thought about the medical bills on my counter, groceries bought with credit cards, nights lying awake doing math that never worked out. There's something else. I stood up and walked to the north wall where Grandpa Joe's letter had mentioned the loose board. It took several minutes, but I found the section of paneling that shifted when pressed. Behind it was a small metal box, painted forest green and slightly rusty. Inside were more papers, additional copies of the will, a bank account number with a balance that made my knees weak, and a sealed letter addressed to Harold. Your father needs to see this. I handed Brandon the letter. His expression cycled through confusion, anger, and grief as he read. When he finished, he looked up with hollow eyes. He knew. Dad knew the whole time. Grandpa Joe wrote to him specifically, explaining his decision, asking Dad to support you. Dad has had this letter for 2 years. What does it say? Brandon's voice broke as he read aloud. Dear Harold, I hope you'll understand and support Megan when the time comes. She's the one who truly loves this place, not as an asset, but as the sanctuary your mother and I intended it to be. Brandon will be fine without this because he has other advantages. Megan needs this place, and this place needs Megan. Don't let family politics override what's right. We sat in silence, listening to the lake water lapping against the dock. These were the sounds I'd fallen asleep to every summer, sounds that had made me feel safe and loved. Maya dozed in my arms, peaceful and trusting. Vic, Brandon said finally, I need you to know something. I never felt completely right about inheriting this place. What do you mean? Every time Dad brought me here to make plans, I kept thinking about you. How you knew every bird call, every fishing spot, every story Grandpa Joe told. I don't know any of that. To me, it was just valuable lakefront real estate. He walked to the window overlooking the water. I was going to sell it after renovations. Use the money for a condo in Portland. The confession proved Grandpa Joe had been right. Brandon didn't understand what this place was supposed to be, a sanctuary, not an investment. What about the renovation loan? I'll figure it out. Sell my truck, move back with Dad temporarily. He turned to face me. I can handle losing the money. What I can't handle is finding out Dad manipulated both of us while you struggled. When you tell your father about this, tell him I want to see him. Here, next weekend. With any other documents he's hiding. Brandon nodded. He's not going to take this well. Dad's never been wrong about anything, at least according to him. I don't care how he takes it. I'm done being grateful for crumbs while everyone else gets the whole meal. 3 days later, Harold arrived looking like he'd aged a decade. His hands shook as he carried a manila folder up the porch steps, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Megan," he said quietly, "Brandon told me what you found." I gestured to the kitchen table where I'd spread out all the documents. "Sit down, Harold. We have 37 years of lies to sort through." He set down his folder and lowered himself into a chair like a man facing execution. "I brought everything. Every document I should have given you 2 years ago." 37 years, I said, echoing his words from that phone call. "You've been calling Brandon the rightful owner." Harold stared at the papers, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I convinced myself I was protecting the family. I thought Joe made a sentimental decision he'd regret. You didn't want to know how bad things were for me. It was easier to assume I was fine than question whether Brandon deserved $500,000. I told myself your marriage meant you were taken care of. I convinced myself I was being practical. You were being selfish and cruel." I slid the deed transfer papers across the table. "Sign these." Harold picked up the pen with trembling hands. "Megan, I know sorry doesn't fix what I've done. Sign the papers, Harold." He signed without further argument, his signature shaky but legally binding. When he finished, he looked up with eyes full of regret and something like relief. "What happens now? Between our families? Now you leave. And you think carefully about what you want our relationship to look like, because I'm done pretending to be grateful for your version of family love." As Harold's car disappeared down the gravel road, I stood on the porch of my cabin, with Maya in my arms. The evening air was crisp with autumn's promise, carrying scents of pine and wood smoke. Across the water, a loon called out its haunting song. I remembered sitting on this same porch with Grandpa Joe, learning to identify that sound and all the others that made up this place's symphony. He'd known I would fight for this sanctuary when the time came. He'd known I was stronger than everyone believed. "Welcome home, little fish," I whispered into the growing darkness, using his old nickname for me. And for the first time in my adult life, standing on my own land with my daughter in my arms and my grandfather's love finally acknowledged, I truly was home. The justice I'd found didn't roar, it whispered like water against the dock, welcoming us both to where we'd always belonged.